Hi, and welcome to Education Roundtable. My name is Larry Petraccaro, and I have here with me my co-host, Johanna Wright, who is a member of the South Orange Maplewood Board of Education. And tonight we're lucky enough to have 4 guests, and we're going to see if I'm lucky enough to remember who they are so I can introduce them to you. Sitting right to our, immediately to Johanna's left is Deborah Davis Ford, who is a trustee in the South Orange Village. And next to her is Rhea Beck. Rhea is the co-founder and chair of PAIRS, which is a Parents in Partnership for Respect and Equity in SOMA Schools. That's the organization that she's founded, and you can see by the smile that I got it right, and which is an independent parent-led coalition. Next to Rhea is Marion Rabb, and Marion is co-founder of South Orange Maplewood Cares About Schools, which currently has about 1,200 members, I think you said, right?
Actually, we just almost hit 1,500 today.
Okay, I stand corrected, 1,500 members. And she's also a local organizer for Save Our Schools New Jersey. And next to Marion is Avery Julian. Avery is a senior at Columbia High School, so that's kind of nice because we're going to get a student perspective. He's a co-leader, of the Black Student Union. And to top it off, he's also a local business owner. So I think that's a pretty significant accomplishment for somebody who at least looks younger than I am. So, anyway, the reason for tonight's meeting, we, as you probably know, we have now have an interim superintendent. We have an interim superintendent because the previous superintendent, John Ramos, had decided to leave after 2 years into a 5-year contract. Now, there could have been various reasons for that. One might be a faulty selection process, which is something that we talked about a little bit, or someone mentioned a little bit before we got on the air. You know, and another could be that there might be issues in South Orange Maplewood in the school district that he just either hadn't anticipated or that he felt overwhelmed by. And there may be others. But in any event, what we'd like to talk about tonight is the what we should look for in a superintendent. And our guests may have some other ideas that they want to bring up, but what we should look for in a superintendent, how that process should go about. But to me, I think what's even more important and more critical is how do we as a community develop trust in the members of the Board of Education that we elect to make the right kind of choices for us. And how do we get, if not consensus, at least an understanding that the people that we've elected have done the best job that they can and have used their judgment the best that they can. So perhaps with that, let's start with you, Deborah, if I may. And I'm going to ask Johanna to interrupt anytime she wants so that you're not just listening to me. Let's start with how important you think the school district is to the two communities of South Orange and Maple. Let's start with that and work our way back down into how we decide what we think is important as a community and how we decide the people we want to lead us.
I think a successful school district is essential to a healthy community, no matter what town or municipality it is. But specifically for Maplewood and South Orange, a school system that's well run, that children are educated, treated fairly, and successful is important to the quality of life here. Is the reasons why the number one reason why people look for a town or municipality to buy a home is what is the quality of the education? What is the environment in the schools? Are they safe not only from physical harm, but are they safe as far as emotional and psychological development? So schools are essential to the health and the growth and the future of any town and municipality, but also especially here in South Orange and Maplewood.
Ray, would you agree? Would you like to add to that?
Absolutely. I don't think that there's much more to say except that, Deborah's absolutely correct in that any school should be the crown jewel of its community. particularly in South Orange and Maplewood, where we talk so much about the value of diversity, and we try to model that for the rest of the state and the rest of the country. I think our schools should be the place where we see that expressed most eloquently for all of our kids.
Marion?
I couldn't agree more with both Deborah and Rhea. South Orange Maplewood has a very strong school district. I think it could be stronger. I think we all probably agree on that. We were once known, I think, as Johanna Wright once described it, as a blue ribbon district. Mm-hmm. And my fear is that we're slipping from that moniker.
And Avery, what do you as a student, do you
I think that Columbia High School specifically is something so special to this community, because look at our alumni. You have nothing but success stories. You have Grammy winners. You have business moguls. And that I think our school and our district is so quick to pat ourselves on the back for everything we do well, but we have to be just as critical of ourselves if we want to have any type of progression.
Well, I heard, Marion, I heard you say, and what I got from you, Avery, is that we can do better. You said we should be able to do better. And you were talking about we pat ourselves on the back for what's good, but we also have to recognize where we need to improve. But is there a possibility that at some point, as somebody once said to me, perfection is the enemy of the good? Do we ever get to the point where we may be doing okay, better than we think we are? I guess that's the question. How would you define a good school system? I mean, I think one of you mentioned the fact that it would be not just a good place for academics, but a good place for the social and emotional development of the students. But Joanna, would you add something to that?
Well, I think it should, our school system is something that we should all pride ourselves on, and we have to make sure that we're educating all of the children, all of the population, which really isn't happening today.
I was just going to say that, yes.
By virtue of the federal government coming in telling us so through the Office of Civil Rights and their complaint, as well as the ACLU. And so what we have to do is try and put support in place for our children who are struggling and who need assistance. And I immediately think of Seth Boyden and
Yes.
and what's happening there. I look at Columbia, and I see two Columbias. And so we have a lot that we can do in terms of improvement. And sitting on the board, for me, coming from the inside out, I come with a lot of experience. And being a part of that blue ribbon district, we were the lighthouse. People look to us, and we want people to look to us again.
Absolutely. I think, Larry, when you ask the question, will the perfect be the enemy of the good? We have to ask ourselves, the school district is good for whom? Mm-hmm. And when we look at the experience of so many students of color, it is undeniable that the district is in fact not even meeting its basic obligations to those students. Columbia High School, I think the statistics are that 95% of white students who graduate from Columbia High School go on to four-year colleges. That statistic is only true for 42% of our black students. That's unconscionable. We cannot congratulate ourselves on that when we look at the disparities that exist within Seth Boyden. And even when we look at some of the gaps in achievement at some of our schools like South Mountain Elementary and Tuscan, where students of color are simply not performing as well as white students. And this has nothing to do with an economic question. Mm-hmm. Those students come from families that make just as much as their white neighbors in that district, but those children are not succeeding in quite the same way. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And what can we do about it?
Well, before we got started, Avery had brought up a point about achievement and time in district. I don't know if you started to say something and I interrupted, but go ahead.
That too, but I was going to connect about the latter part of what you said to the issue about what we should look for in a new superintendent. And I think it's this a certain understanding of race and how it kind of affects students as they go through their education. If we have teachers, if we have administrators, or even the superintendent who view race as this intrinsic thing to people and not as something that people are socialized through, then they're going to have these natural understandings and preconceived notions about their black students. Aggressive, stupid, angry, instead of looking at them as people that have been marginalized, people that have been set apart and ostracized in the classroom and taught not to learn.
Yeah, you used two words. I wish I could remember what they were, but when you were describing it, You were, before you used the word ostracized, you were talking about something about how the students were identified, I think. I wish I could remember what you said, but I can't. So what would you propose that does this start at the superintendent level, the teacher level? Where does it start?
I think it's something that's really tricky because it starts in the interview for a teacher. It starts when when we sit down and like at the kindergarten level. It starts with literally from the very beginning, from the very point where we are socialized. It begins because we're socialized. You're asking the whole point of perfection. I think a better question would be: is it possible to reach some type of progressiveness in a racialized society, as racialized as we are now, especially with the current political climate that's taken over since November? Those are the important questions, and I guess the solution would be to continue what we've been doing. I myself, being a co-leader this year, activism has been rampant at Columbia, and that's due to the drawbacks we've had from the administration, from people that don't want to see certain levels of equality, they just want to talk about equity.
I think that it's at multiple levels is how the teachers are selected and trained. It is the leadership of the principal and the correct superintendent who understands a diverse community and how different groups may learn differently or respond differently. I'll share a personal story of a relative in an adjacent community. If it wasn't for African American, my nephew, if it wasn't for the engagement and involvement of his parents with a teacher who did not really understand how to teach a very active third grader. And the solution they came up was to put him on medication, or Ritalin, I think it was. And the parents said, absolutely not. Sister was there for maybe every week or whatever, but today, because the parents were engaged and made sure that my nephew was educated properly, he now has his master's and is doing quite well in the profession he's chosen. But that's just one child who happened to have parents who had the wherewithal to say that you have to understand how to teach a child that is bright but different, but you wanted to dumb them down and drug them up. And maybe that's how another situation where that you don't give the resources or the support based on where they are that they need, and therefore they have the ability but end up not in the academic courses that they should be able to participate in and also thrive and grow, and the percentages increase for those who go to college.
Well, we only have a little over a minute, but from a practical point of view, somebody might say, well, every parent expects a school district to be devoted to his child. I mean, if you have to set priorities or if you have limited resources, then it seems to me you have, not necessarily that you don't do the kinds of intervention, but how do you most effectively maximize that intervention over a broad range? Or are you saying you can't do that? I mean, that everything is so individual. I mean,
I would like to actually, if I may interrupt.
Yeah, we only have about 40 seconds.
Disagree
Go ahead.
slightly with my panelists. I think we should be in a school district where parents do not have to be so vigilant, where the administration and the board of directors of our school district know how to run a school district, are not overwhelmed in the weeds of running the school district, so that parents have to be such vocal advocates, and not just parents, and it's a huge issue for parents of students of color, and it's also a huge issue for parents of students with special needs and disabilities, which is a very overlooked segment of our school district.
Okay. That's an interesting point. And we're going to have to stop, and we'll be back in a minute or so, but I think I might like to follow up on that and a couple of other notes. So if you'll stay with us, we'll be back in a minute.
Battles aren't won solely on the field. Battles are won within. Over enemies of fear. Enemies of doubt. In that place where promises are kept. In the heart of every Marine, you'll find a promise. A promise of battles won.
Okay, well, welcome back. This is Larry Petraccaro and Johanna Wright, and we're here with Education Roundtable with our guests, and Deborah Davis Ford, Rhea Beck, Marion Rabb, and Avery Julian.
Look at you.
I'm proud of myself for remembering.
I'd like to ask our guests, what are you looking for in a superintendent as we go down that road, and within a year we were looking for that permanent?
Well, I spent some time this morning with a Brookings Institute report about the value of superintendents in schools. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of data out there, as you mentioned, Larry, I'm a very metrics-driven person. There's not a whole lot of data out there that supports that superintendents on their own can, in effect, you know, close student achievement gaps. You know, typically superintendents stay in a district for about 3 years. That's the national average. So, you know, my expectation is not that someone will come in here and wave a magic wand and fix all our problems. But I will tell you that as a parent, someone who has been on the receiving end of a lot of the directives of the Board of Education, I value transparency. And I value that because I believe that a successful superintendent can be deeply engaged with the community. I mean the business community, the parent community, the nonprofit community. And the way that we build trust and the way that we build real partnership is through transparency. So for me, that would really be at the top of transparency, and then a real organizational strength. Someone who understands how organizations are run, who knows how to run a small company, as it were. You know, our district is a small one and we need to tighten things up. I think my colleague here will talk a lot more about that. But those two things are a real priority for me.
The two things being transparency
and organizational capacity.
Transparency is huge, and there was absolutely no transparency in the hiring of John Ramos. The board picked him behind closed doors. We were presented with Ramos at a board meeting as a fait accompli, essentially, that he's your new superintendent, deal with it. We had members of my group founded because we were sitting in that board meeting, and one of my co-founders Googled the name John Ramos. We'd never heard of him, and we found out that he was basically fired as superintendent of the Bridgeport School District, and the state came in and took over the Bridgeport district from him. And that was the best we could do for a superintendent. Not only that, we gave him a 5-year contract. And I personally lobbied 2 board members at the time, one of whom is still on the board, one of whom is not, begged them in person, please do not give this guy a 5-year contract with his background. Just let's do a 2 or 3 year with an option to renew. And I was just, you know, completely practically laughed out of the conversation. The board did not want any public input in the hiring of the last superintendent. While I am cautiously optimistic with our new interim superintendent, Mr. Fakara, he does seem like he has what it may take to at least come in and stabilize our district. I might also point out that the board, as far as I know, had no community input in the hiring of our interim. Mm-hmm. And while the board is saying they're going to have transparency in the hiring of our new superintendent, I need to see it to believe it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, to echo that point, I spoke with several of the board members who shared with me that the board felt that it was their primary duty and responsibility to hire and supervise a superintendent. It's sort of the one hire that the board makes. And while I understand that we have elected board members to serve in that capacity, I do think that there are some tremendous national models out there for community engagement and input in the selection process. Cambridge, Massachusetts spent a lot of time publicizing, in fact, the way, the model that they used for community engagement, and it's been tremendously successful. And it's as simple things as creating surveys for community members to help identify what were the priorities, creating focus groups, having meetings with the community, selecting members from the community, 3 business people, 3 parents, 3 teachers. There are all of these really simple but effective ways to come together and create transparency and openness and integrity around, and I'm not suggesting that there wasn't integrity, but I am saying that every single parent that I've met has said to me that they felt that both of the previous processes have not been transparent. And so there are ways to do that that are simple, effective, don't cost anything, but build so much trust and so much accountability and so much value to the process. And I also spent some time today on the board site trying to get a sense of what the bylaws were that would prevent such a thing from happening.
Good luck
And there
with
are
that.
none. No, I spent all day. I called up a couple lawyer friends of mine. I said, I'm reading these bylaws. I've served as a nonprofit executive director myself for the majority of my career, sat on boards, and I can find nothing. In fact, there is nothing that mandates that community members, or there cannot be some wider engagement from the village council, for example, from students. There can be input. There's no reason why we shouldn't do it, and I think the time is now.
I like to weigh in on that point of transparency and inclusiveness regarding the municipal elected officials such as myself. And a couple of simple things is, why would you schedule, when you have so many choices, your board meeting on the nights that the council meets? And I've asked that.
Yes.
I had a meeting almost 2 months ago with the outgoing superintendent over the issues of this, the slavery assignment. But one of the things that I requested from him is that that some member of the superintendent's office or the board come before the municipal government once a quarter, just to give us an update. Tell us, just tell us what are your challenges, what are you achieving, what's going on. And I said, and that was important as far as transparency and
Absolutely.
connecting, is that in South Orange, the budget we just looked at again last night, 57% of the tax dollars are going to support the school system.
That's right.
And so that's a significant part
Yes,
of
absolutely.
our taxpayers' money. But I don't begrudge supporting and financing the public school system, because it is essential to a healthy community. With that said, we need you to communicate with us. We need you to come before us. We need for you, if you want us to engage, to show up at your meeting or be available to do that, not to have it on a night that we have our municipal meeting.
And we have a lot of those situations in terms of the breakdown in communication. It's awfully, awfully important. But I want, Avery, I see you were about to say something, so I'll cut that.
I'd like to give my perspective on what we should look for in a superintendent. I think I'd like to echo the point I made earlier, somebody that has a specific understanding of race and how it plays into education in today's world.
Right.
But secondly, someone, this might sound crazy, that has a passion for the children in this district.
Yes.
That wants to see them prosper and do well. Someone that's going to be in the schools more than just coming to an assembly to talk a lot about nothing. And honestly, there's no personal attack towards Mr. Ramos. Just I have a specific issue with adults that, for whatever reason, don't put the priorities of the children they're charged with taking care of at the forefront of their agenda. There is a large mistrust between the board and the students and the community in general.
Right.
And the only people that tend to suffer are the people that walk in and out of this building every day.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would like to find in superintendent, this will be real quick, 15 seconds. I'd like for them to live in the state.
Thank you. That would be really nice if we could have a superintendent from New Jersey, from the United States, who's familiar with New Jersey school funding issues, which are significant and complex and frightening. When I think in Maplewood we also are very close to 60% of our property taxes go directly to the public schools. It is the largest percentage of our very large property bill. And I think the Board of Education needs to realize that it is accountable to us. The Board of Ed needs to be accountable to us, the voters and the taxpayers, when they make decisions like this.
May I question you on that? I mean,
Sure.
Yes, it's clear that they have to be accountable, but you've got a range of people. You got people like me. Our kids have been out of the school system for years.
Right.
You've probably got a lot of older people who are struggling to
Right.
stay in town.
Like me.
Empty nesters.
So
Yes.
I don't think there's any one of us. I know I wouldn't disagree. Johanna won't disagree that a sound school system, an excellent school system, is important, and certainly. I think that's a good use of taxes. It's a lot. It could get to be the point where I couldn't stay anymore, and I don't want that to happen. But when you talk about accountability, I think there are segments of the community that have. I think the majority of people in these two communities do not have children in the school system. So how are you accountable to them? But that's just a point. But let me I just wanted to say, am I interrupting?
No, you go ahead.
Transparency. Everyone's spoken about transparency. Is the ultimate reason for transparency to have trust in those officials you've elected to do the things you want? Because I've heard transparency, I've heard trust, I've heard organization. I've also heard that you mentioned that Cambridge was a place that had put in place a process that made sense. And from the description you made of it, it makes sense. But let me just ask, is transparency the big issue, or is trust the big issue?
I think it's both. I think it's almost an equal amount of both.
It is, and I think the board, my colleagues would agree on the board that we do have those issues, along with, I think, communication. And when we're talking about the budget and finance, I can't remember a time, Larry, and you can back me up on this, when the school system has needed something that the towns did not give it.
Absolutely.
Because that's how important the schools were to us. But when we changed the process in terms of the election, and we moved the elections from April to November, we turned over the taxing of our communities to 9 people who sit in that horseshoe, as versus to the CBAC and the Board of School Estimate, who would sit down and
Right.
the towns would get
We did that.
That's a
together.
very good point. Very good point.
And decide how monies were being spent, and there was more transparency. And I've sat on the finance committee, and I ask a lot of questions during the budget season. And when I see a budget that's coming out and it's not supporting students, but more companies and outsourced companies and things like that, when you find them, and our kids aren't getting the things that they absolutely need, it's a problem. So maybe we need to think about what we're doing, but I can't remember a time ever when we needed something that we didn't get it from these two communities. I mean, because it's really, really important. And like you said, I'm retired. I'm on a fixed income, and the taxes are imploding, and we deserve to get better from the schools from our tax dollars.
That's another conversation, because the relief for property owners won't happen until we change the way we fund public education. The other quick thing, if you never had children, or if your children didn't attend school here, or if you're retired, I still think as a community we're all responsible for
Yes.
contributing to the education of our young people, for the quality of life and your life, and who's going to take care of you when you're old. you know?
Absolutely.
I agree
The
with you.
American public school
Yeah.
system is, I was taught in a public high school in New York City that I graduated from, that the American public school system is the great equalizer.
Yes.
That is what it is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be the great outsourcer, or the great privatizer, or the great charterizer. We're
Right.
supposed to be the great equalizer. And the more we can focus on putting our tax dollars efficiently to work in our public schools with transparency and openness from our public officials, the better we will do.
And to answer your question about, for those people who don't have children currently or never did have children, the fact is, South Orange Maplewood has a brand, right? We have a brand ideal. We think of ourselves as this community that is not just prosperous in terms of maybe some of the socioeconomic factors, but prosperous in terms of the people who live here. We have talented, creative,
Absolutely.
smart, business
Yes.
and when you go to the far-flung reaches of Brooklyn and you ask people who are clawing to get out, where do they want to go? They want to come here. That is the brand that this town has created, and we should do everything in our power to uphold that brand and to amplify that brand.
Yes.
But this is
Beautifully
the,
said.
We
Thank
have
you.
only a few seconds left, but I want to say one thing before we go. I do agree with you that we have, and I don't hope you didn't mean that you think people who don't have kids in the school system don't support it.
No, I was
I think there's
responding
a
to your question.
responsibility on the part of the people that run the school system to use that money effectively, so that we
Absolutely.
can maintain the diversity, both age, income, and race in this community. Got it?
And I
Amen.
think that's what she
Okay,
was saying.
well, amen, that's a good way to end. So with that, we're going to end. Thank you for joining us on Education Roundtable. This has been Larry Petraccaro with Johanna Wright and 4 guests.